Black women are supposed to bow and sob. Why are you upright? The patrolman growled, pistol leveled at a black woman in the middle of a funeral. Her only offense was her skin. What he didn't know: the woman in his sights was a 4-star Army general, feared in war rooms across the Pentagon. This time, the badge didn't own the law. Dignity did. That morning, Arlington National Cemetery wore a thin fog, a pale veil draped over grief that hadn't yet learned to breathe. The flag flew at half-staff, sagging in the early March chill. Rows of black-draped chairs lined the grass beneath old oaks. Families sat stiff as flagpoles, uniforms too tight with sorrow. Every gaze locked on the flag-covered coffin at the ceremonial center. Children wore tiny dress uniforms. Parents straightened medals with trembling fingers. No one spoke. No one dared cough. This was a military funeral. Sorrow restrained so that only one thing remained: honor. A black SUV slid through a side gate, engine barely audible. The rear door opened. Polished shoes touched earth. Guards snapped to attention, saluting before their minds even caught up. She stepped out alone. No aides, no entourage, just a compact urn wrapped in black cloth. Lieutenant General Adrian Blake, late 50s, ribbons spanning campaigns the public preferred not to remember. Her expression was granite, eyes steady. The silence surrounding her walk pulled people to their feet. Not from fear, but recognition. A general had come to bury a soldier she once commanded. Only one man didn't rise. Officer Nolan Briggs, responsible for the West Perimeter, strode forward and slapped his palm against the SUV's hood. The crack of flesh on metal ripped the ceremony open. A young flag-bearer flinched, the pole slipping, wooden tips striking ground with a dry snap. A boy in a miniature uniform whispered, "Mom, is he yelling at her?" His mother only clenched her veil. Adrian stood motionless, gaze traveling from Briggs's reddened palm to his eyes, cold, unfinished cement. She stepped forward. He moved a block. Authority puffed around him like cheap cologne. "Thought you were with the choir," he sneered. He stared at her 4 stars as if they'd been bought online. One guard glanced at the other, but both stayed rooted. Adrian opened a leather case, raised her military ID with textbook precision, and waited. Briggs barely looked. "These fakes are impressive now," he said loudly, "especially for people desperate to prove something." A strangled sound rippled from the seating. Half-stifled SOB, half-teeth grinding. Adrian's face never shifted. She slid the ID away and stepped toward the coffin. Briggs thrust an arm out. "Blocking! You're not going through. Restricted ceremonial zone? You're not on my list." An old veteran murmured, "Are we burying a soldier? Or honor?" The whisper didn't travel far, but it buried itself deep. No one intervened, not because they agreed, but because uncertainty shackled them. If they stepped in, would the system stand behind them or crush them? The sky darkened a shade, wind brushing the coffin flag before it settled like a kneeling body. Adrian stayed put. Her shoes hovered one pace from Briggs's boots. Her eyes held no rage, only a colder refusal. Briggs faltered a fraction, then stiffened. "I have authority to question you," he hissed. "You don't have authority to answer. Without command clearance, you don't belong here. Those stars don't exempt you from inspection." His words aimed not at her face, but at the rows of metal on her chest, honor treated like contraband. The flag-bearer sighed softly, straightening his pole. The boy watched, sensing only that someone rightful was being denied. Adrienne looked toward the coffin. She neither advanced nor retreated. Her fingers dug into the urn, gripping memory like something that must not be shattered. Her stance said what her voice refused to waste breath on. She stood, living monument, splitting the funeral between prejudice and duty, authority and fear. A black woman in uniform occupying a space some believe sacred only when guarded by whiteness. Then the moment froze, stretched thin as glass. In that stillness, one truth rose louder than rank or procedure. This wasn't a battlefield, it was a burial, and the fallen had been pushed aside so someone could perform dominance in a borrowed costume. Adrienne's name didn't need announcing. It was already etched in the chill, crawling down each spine. She held the urn in one hand, the ID in the other, metal catching noon sun like a quiet accusation. Briggs mistook her silence for defiance he could crush. He lunged forward, snatching the card so hard her jacket hem quivered. Holding it aloft, he squinted, flipping it like a counterfeit bill at a flea market. He spat on the grass at her feet, missing by inches on purpose. The cemetery froze again. Even the distant cadence of boots from the honor guard stopped mid-step, as if sound itself refused to proceed. Suspicion mutated into something heavier. Intent. A young white soldier along the left flank edged forward, lungs filling with words. His superior's hand landed on his shoulder. "Not the time yet," he murmured, gentle, warning, wrapped in routine. In the military, "not the time" wasn't instruction, it was price tag. Any act off script came with cost. Today the one paying was a black general facing an invisible weapon called doubt. Briggs kept the ID, letting it hover like evidence of his power. "They forged them real clean," he muttered, voice calibrated for the perimeter cameras. "Cities like Detroit, Atlanta, full of people who buy rank they can't earn," he didn't yell, but each consonant ground down like boots on grit. In the bushes, a cluster of journalism students filmed, shaky phones streaming. Within minutes, a caption hit a military form, cop grills, 4-star general, at funeral. Adrienne still didn't speak. No defense, no justification, just a silence that grew heavier than any shouted protest. She stepped forward, closing the distance until Briggs's breath warmed her collar. Her eyes turned into an unflinching mirror. Her voice dropped, not weak, but weighted. "You're not questioning the cards," she said slowly. "You're questioning whether someone like me has the right to carry it." No thunder, just wind pressing those words into every listening chest. Briggs's mouth tightened. For the first time his mask cracked, not into remorse, but irritation that the blow had arrived so clean, carved from ice instead of fury. Retreat would mean admitting a truth his world forbade. "You're eloquent," he sneered. "But protocol says ID alone doesn't confirm identity. I'm authorized to verify. I'm not finished." His trap wasn't to contain a person, but to drag the entire ritual down into his bitterness. The crowd stayed hushed, yet phones lifted like a slow tide. They weren't calling for help. They were documenting the moment power chose humiliation over restraint. Adrienne reached for her card. Briggs held on a heartbeat too long. She tightened her grip and pulled. Decisive, swift, not violent. The card snapped back into her hand. The ring of metal against her nail sliced through the air, sharp enough to make the wind flinch. She turned away, leaving Briggs stranded in the aisle, hand empty, expression jarred open. As he fumbled for a new excuse, a notification buzzed on a young soldier's phone. Live stream. Cop versus general. 120,000 watching. No commander barked orders. No slogans rose. The mother with the boy in miniature uniform simply stood and stepped into the aisle, walking towards the casket. She ignored Briggs completely, eyes only for Adrian. Her nod said everything. Something had ended. Something else was beginning. A new ritual, born where the old one failed. No one dared call the funeral interrupted. Those paying attention understood. The real burial had just started. Adrian moved forward, not rushing, not hesitant. Each step weighted with someone who'd crossed kill zones without asking permission. Her shoes pressed, cracked soil beside the coffin, ground exhaling under a woman who refused submission. She held the urn steady, not a grain disturbed. Every breath drew an invisible line. "Who truly has the right to approach?" Briggs growled, impatience sliding into threat. "You take one more step, I treat it as hostile." No one saw his hand shift until his Glock cleared the holster. The metallic scrape tore through the sacred quiet like nails on glass. The sound didn't belong here, yet here it was, at a soldier's goodbye. Adrian neither advanced nor backed away. She stood level with the barrel aimed at her chest. The coffin flag twitched, as if honor itself were staring down the muzzle, wondering who the real threat was. "One more movement and I'll consider it aggression," Briggs hissed. The funeral's lungs locked. A portrait atop the casket trembled, toppled, shattered on stone. The fallen soldier's photo rolled to a stop at Adrian's polished shoes. A lieutenant's instincts snapped. "Everyone back!" he shouted. The command echoed, then faded into stillness. No one moved. Stepping away now meant agreeing that a gun could rule a military cemetery unchallenged. A white colonel in uniform near Briggs stepped aside, leaving his orbit. Not to aid Adrian, not to confront Briggs, just to align himself silently with the coffin, remembering why he'd come, not for a cop's ego. Adrian didn't stoop to retrieve the fallen portrait, not because she didn't care, but because a bowed head would live forever in someone else's narrative. Instead, she centered the urn again, anchoring calm where panic tried to bloom. She became a ridgeline between violence and reverence. "If I die here," she said quietly, "the whole country will know why." It wasn't a threat. It was a sworn statement nailed to history's door. Heart skipped. Her words silenced everything because they framed the moment as permanent record. Briggs knew it. He'd lost control. His hand stayed rigid, but his eyes wavered. Somewhere behind them, a boy whispered, "Is he scared of her?" His mother didn't answer. She couldn't, because the boy's question brushed what everyone felt but wouldn't say. The man with the gun wasn't afraid of danger. He was terrified of losing dominance. A soft breeze returned, lifting the coffin flag's edge like a scar catching light. In a place where weapons weren't meant to appear, one had. And the only barrier between that gun and catastrophe was one unbroken woman. No one screamed. No phones rose now. Shame had turned spectators to statues. This was no longer cop versus general. It was honor versus privilege. One ready to endure, one ready to fire. Justice trembling in between. The wind died. The flag stilled. Cracks in the soil beneath Adrian's shoes resembled fault lines, reaching toward the institution she now stood against. She stood not with bullets, not with legal briefs, but with posture alone. She didn't watch the gun. She watched the photo at her feet. The soldier who'd once called her Mayim over gunfire. His image now lay between the muzzle and the commander who'd led him. A silver-haired, three-star general to her left, late 70s, leaned on his cane, shoulders refusing to straighten. His hand shook visibly, knuckles blanching. A tear traced across weathered skin, not from fear, but crushing shame. "Don't," he whispered into the open air. "As long as you keep standing, there's a chance we can still save this uniform." His words sounded like a verdict handed down on his own generation. Adrian heard him but didn't turn. Her gaze held steady on that narrow corridor where ceremony, gun, and principle collided. In the armed forces, not everyone is allowed to aim a weapon, and never at sacrifice. Briggs clung to his stance. Sweat trickled along his temple, not from the sun, but from realizing he no longer controlled the silence. He'd expected obedience, not resistance, shaped like a quiet, unyielding presence. A low buzzing emerged overhead. A drone hovered, lens trained on Briggs' face. Not the frantic zoom of cable news, deliberate, slow, documenting each twitch as if carving his features into a permanent archive. He couldn't point his gun at it, couldn't order it down. All he could do was stand there like wrongdoing that hadn't yet been named. Behind him, a young soldier unzipped his pack, revealing a second folded flag. It was backup, a word that said more than speeches. No one prepares an extra flag unless they know something might fracture the ritual. They'd anticipated disruption, maybe even a weapon, and came ready to protect honor twice. Adrian shifted her right heel barely, then set it back exactly where it had been. A final declaration. Not retreating, not advancing, refusing to be pushed or to flee. Her medals glinted, but principles anchored her there. Briggs's voice came out slower now, fear tasting metallic on each word. "You're provoking me! I'm entitled to respond if I feel threatened." The line fell useless, like a spent shell rattling across concrete. No one countered him aloud. They didn't need to. The crowd's faces, hard, distant, answered with a verdict. "You're not threatened, you're exposed." The elderly three-star turned away, unable to watch a man justify pointing a gun at grief. He'd seen many deaths, but none this disgraceful. The attempted strangling of military integrity wrapped in phrases like, "my right." Dust hung heavier. Each particle weighted with complicity or courage. Even a falling leaf landed without sound. Time still moved. The system didn't. It hung between honor and authority, between those standing straight and those straining to appear righteous. A distant car horn drifted in, irrelevant to the decision forming here. Everyone present understood. The next chapter wouldn't be written by pundits. It would live in their eyes, their memories, their choices when another gun appeared where it never should. They weren't just witnesses. They were now part of the record. Briggs scanned the cemetery for support, hunting for a sympathetic nod. None came. No one met his gaze. Shoulders sagged slightly, the taut line between barrel and target thinning into something that looked less like authority, more like panic. A soft click sounded behind him. The unmistakable release of a weapon by military security. Two officers in dark vests approached, hands resting correctly on holsters. Posture calm, but irreversible. No shouted order, no drama. They crossed the perimeter with purpose, heading straight for Briggs. "Drop your weapon," one said, voice carrying that final, uncompromising cadence only military command possesses. Briggs scoffed. "Political theater," he barked. "You think this is a movie?" His words slid over gravestones and uniforms, but silence had evolved into judgment. The officers didn't argue, they moved. One disarmed him in a single practiced motion. The other cuffed his wrists behind his back. Only then did it seem to hit him. Guns are never authorized at a military funeral. Not like that. Not ever. The realization flickered, then hardened back into defiance. He lifted his chin toward Adrian. "I know exactly who you are," he spat. She didn't respond. He'd mistaken recognition for power. She understood. Silence was heavier. With hands bound, Briggs resembled a cracked statue, outer stone intact, inside hollow. They walked him out beneath the heaviest quiet a person can endure. No boos, no applause, only a crowd asking itself, why so late? Adrian didn't watch him leave. She stared forward at the broken photograph still lying on the ground. The glass splintered, frame chipped, but the young soldier's smile remained uncut. No one rushed to pick it up. They were learning to sit with consequence instead of tidying it away. An old man with white hair and World War II ribbons pushed himself upright, leaning on his cane. He moved slowly into the aisle where Briggs had stood and struck the cane 3 times against stone. Each crack echoed like a bell, shaking dust from the ceremony's polished surface. "Today, morality turns a page," he rasped. No applause. Heads bowed, not to him but to the blunt truth. The crowd's faces became shards of a broken mirror, each reflecting shame in different shapes. They understood. Every person there had, in some way, helped this moment fester by staying quiet for too long. 1 second to draw a gun. 1 second to fracture something that once felt untouchable. No one said suspension. No one uttered isolated incident. Cameras, witnesses, and the unforgiving memory of uniforms had already rendered judgment. A cop had raised a gun at a general during a funeral. The system would answer. The ceremony limped back into motion. Honor Guard reformed. A senior officer replaced the shattered frame with another pulled from the auxiliary hall. Movements followed the original script, but faith in sacredness carried a crack. That fracture wasn't born from bullets. It came from permission, from the quiet consent that let someone like Briggs rise to a post where he believed he could point a weapon at honor unchallenged. The mother with the miniature uniformed boy sat stiff. He asked no more questions, but his small hand crushed fabric of the mourning flag across her lap. What he learned that day wouldn't come from textbooks. Rifles fired their 3 volleys. Drums rolled, precise and cold. Yet the ritual couldn't drown what came before. 1 second for a gun. 1 second for a nation to see how rotten certain roots had become. It also took 1 second for Adrian Blake to remain standing, forcing the institution to choose complicity or reckoning. The country woke within hours asking the same thing. Who is she? Her name, rank, and record surfaced like something long held underwater. Not from investigative exposés, but because the system that once sidelined her now had no choice but transparency. General Adrian Blake, United States Army, first black woman to command 3 operational combat formations simultaneously. The woman held at gunpoint was the same commander who'd once led a daring rescue from a rebel prison near Kandahar. Among the saved, the son of a Virginia state senator. The senator frequently railed against diversity initiatives in the armed forces. An old Pentagon photo showed Blake kneeling under fire, bandaging a panicked private's leg. Headlines didn't need embellishment. One paper ran, "A general was held at gunpoint. Now, America's on trial." The facts alone were enough to send a chill through households that usually watched wars from couches. She'd led 5 cross-border counter-terror missions into Syria, survived an ambush in Iraq that left her the only unwounded officer, carried 3 bleeding soldiers back to safety while shrapnel tore her shoulder. Twice she declined promotion to a cushy Pentagon post, choosing instead to stay with field units. Her name spread through Twitter, Reddit, veteran forums. No one asked about party affiliation. The question was simpler. How could this happen to her? The hashtag #funeral Gungate vaulted to the top of trends within hours. One veteran posted, "Never seen my service disgraced like that. Never seen a general endure such humiliation with such quiet honor." A war correspondent who'd shadowed Blake in Mosul wrote, "She's the only person I've watched step over a corpse and still remind her squad why they carry weapons in the first place." Pushback came. A conservative senator known for opposing women in special operations defended Briggs. "Protocol verification," he insisted. "Any potential threat must be treated seriously, regardless of who's involved." He didn't expect his only child, a Navy lieutenant stationed in Guam, to post one sentence at midnight. "Dad, that woman dragged me out of a minefield in Helmand. Stop defending the indefensible." The tweet rocketed past 1 million shares. Foreign media weighed in. A French daily called it a slap to American pride. A British paper described the funeral as a surreal collision of race, power, and military reverence. Still, everything circled back. Who is she that just standing still forced the system to remember what it owed? That evening, a veteran anchor opened the nightly news with an unexpected line. "There are people who wear rank, and people who are rank," he said. "General Adrienne Blake doesn't need stars. The system straightens itself when she refuses to bend." Blake gave no interviews, no press statements. Those who knew her understood it wasn't fear. She'd already said what needed saying by not stepping back when a gun intruded on sacred ground. For soldiers, the truest reply isn't always firing back. Sometimes it's holding your ground so others don't have to bow later. Her stillness became louder than any counter-speech. Veterans groups responded in measured fury. A coalition of organizations sent an open letter to the Defense Department. If someone like Blake is not recognized, even in Arlington, then we must re-examine our eyes and our conscience. War colleges pulled cadets into emergency forums about ritual, authority, and moral thresholds. A West Point cadet admitted, "I don't know if I'd have stood like she did, but I know I can't stay silent next time." Her story left the realm of incident. It became a mirror. The footage showed no grand gestures, just a woman gripping an urn and refusing to be moved. Nothing staged, nothing polished. That rawness is what stuck. Adrienne Blake no longer needed introductions. Her name shifted from title to question. Why did it take a gun in her face for people like her to be fully acknowledged as real? Her silence lasted exactly 36 hours. No public appearances. While commentators argued whether she'd speak like a hero or recede like a victim, she submitted a single line to the Department of Justice. "I will testify as a witness, not a victim." No legal theatrics, no PR team. Just a sentence that lit the next fuse. The moment law would have to decide what, exactly, it stood for when no one was firing back. The DOJ responded in under 6 hours. A press release, 3 paragraphs long, appeared. The unwarranted use of armed force by a police officer in a national military ceremonial zone would be investigated. Phrases cut like alarms, unwarranted force, desecration, federally protected ceremonial zone. For the first time, a police officer faced federal charges, not for street overreach, but for violating the sanctity of national service on its most sacred ground. Inside the military, the backlash intensified. Leaked emails showed over 35 active generals signing a demand. The trial must be public, not to shield one person, but to defend the moral perimeter of the entire force. A retired four-star wrote privately to the Chief Justice, "Anyone who has served under Blake understands what is on trial here. This is about whether our uniforms still mean anything at all." Briggs chose his attorney, a familiar face known for defending January 6th rioters. At his first press conference, the lawyer didn't apologize. "My client acted in duty," he declared. The lawyer stated, "No one can disprove that he felt threatened." It was a dangerous strategy, defending feelings instead of actions. In a culture increasingly comfortable elevating subjective fear over objective harm, it was a loaded blade, sharp in every direction. Veteran coalitions answered with another letter, this time to Congress and DOJ. "Do not turn justice into a rehearsal for politics. We care less about parties than about a funeral becoming a stage for rank humiliation." Then a briefing video leaked from within the state police. Grainy, under a minute, but clear. A voice identified as Briggs's rang out, "If any colored person tries to cross that line unlisted, I'll teach them a lesson right there." The clip detonated across feeds. At a special briefing, the Attorney General didn't lean on legal jargon. The Attorney General stated, "I don't care who stood in front of the gun. I care why the man holding it believed he could." Outrage shifted from flashes of anger to something deeper, slower. Adrienne remained publicly silent. The only person she met with was the Assistant U.S. Attorney. According to that account, she said, "I didn't come to be defended. I came to see what justice does when nobody's shooting back." The indictment listed 5 charges: using a weapon in a federally protected ceremonial zone, racially motivated threat, abuse of authority, obstruction of military rights, and desecration of a service member's dignity, carrying a potential life sentence. Hearings would be public. Courtroom 3 in Washington, D.C. was chosen. Records would remain intact. No politician, no office holder was allowed to tamper with the jury. The law, for once, wasn't optional theater. Somewhere far from those marble halls, a handwritten letter left a modest mailbox in a Missouri town. No official seal, just blue ink on plain paper from a woman living alone. "My son died for America," wrote Helen Price. America didn't keep its promise to him, not even at his funeral. No rage, no slogans, just words sharp as needles pointing where the nation refused to look. Her son, Staff Sergeant Tyler Price, had fallen during his 3rd deployment on the Syrian border. Ambush, broken radios, no extraction. He received a Purple Hearts and a burial with full honors, until a gun appeared. Helen's letter, barely 2 pages, spread everywhere. One final line anchored it. "He once told me, 'If I die, ask General Blake to say a few words.' They didn't even let her near his body." A fellow soldier posted a page from Tyler's combat journal, dirt-stained and smudged. "If something happens to me," it read, "I hope Ms. Blake does my eulogy. Her voice over gunfire is what kept me breathing." No one could manufacture something that specific. No argument could sanitize pointing a gun at Blake as she approached Tyler's coffin. In Georgia, at St. Luke's Church, the Price family's parish held a prayer service. A banner at the entrance read, "We pray not to restore what's lost, but so we don't forget what was promised." No cameras, just 40 aging veterans kneeling and whispering for a different kind of courage. Afterward, the pastor, Father Miguel Harris, nearing 70, was invited to bless the local police precinct. He declined with a single sentence: "I cannot bless a place that once pointed a gun at honor." Public emotion stopped feeling like a wave and became a tide. Veteran gathering shifted focus from politics to dignity. One old soldier in New Mexico said, "I've seen men die of thirst, never saw a general blocked from her dead." Those present at the funeral began writing personal accounts. One mother recorded every flicker across her son's face when the gun appeared. A medic wrote down blood pressure spikes in elderly attendees as the confrontation unfolded. Line by line, these notes formed a sharper archive than any official report. Scholars called it slow moral accumulation. What happens when a society used to closing its eyes is forced to leave them open. On Black service member forums, a simple phrase caught fire: "We've been waiting this long." No explanation attached. Anyone who'd ever worn the uniform while Black understood exactly what waited meant. Briggs's history surfaced next. Internal personnel files from his 13-year career dripped onto the internet. Buried among them, a complaint he'd filed in 2012 to Military District 7 at Fort Liberty. He'd been rejected from enlistment, not for fitness, but for psychological screening. His grievance accused the unit of over-favoring Black soldiers. In the margin, red ink underlined, "If someone like me can't serve, people like them aren't real soldiers." No one had wanted to confront that sentence back then. Now, with Arlington burned into memory, it read like a prologue. Briggs hadn't stumbled into prejudice, he'd cultivated it. In an old documentary about street patrols, he'd said on camera, "I can't stand a world where people wear rank they didn't earn. When the game's rigged, breaking rules stops being wrong. It becomes inevitable." Asked what he meant, he smirked. "If they won't let me in, I'll guard the gate." At the time, it sounded like bitter humor. Now it sounded like a blueprint. His 2012 psych evaluation summarized him in one line: "Candidate exhibits a damaged value system and uncontrolled responses toward individuals who surpass his imagined criteria." Not a diagnosis, an early warning that no one enforced. During a search of his home, investigators found a small leather notebook. Inside, only 4 words in red ink: "I will take back." Same handwriting, same anger, same vow never properly addressed. Colleagues described him cautiously. He rarely spoke, but after shifts under Black commanding officers, he'd mutter, "Nowadays, talk the right politics, and you outrun bullets." Each stray comment now slid into place like evidence. Monday morning, courtroom 3. The air itself felt pressed into attention. No one checked phones. No one shuffled papers loudly. It was as if the country had squeezed itself inside these 4 walls. Adrienne Blake walked in, uniform razor sharp, 4 stars bright under fluorescent lights. Medals arrayed across her chest, not as decoration, but as ledger entries written in blood and sand. She raised her right hand to swear in. The clerk read her name, age, 57, and rank. When offered a chair, she shook her head slightly. "I'll stand," she said, in a room where injustice had long sat comfortably. Briggs's attorney, gray-templed and polished, approached it like he was testing advertising copy. "General, you chose to wear full uniform today. Is that to remind everyone you're the injured party?" he asked, smile thin. Adrienne's posture tightened. "I wear this," she answered, "because the person I'm here to speak about can't anymore." She removed a small box, setting a purple heart on the stand. No cameras had recorded the day she received it. "I left pieces of myself in a valley no one flies over," she said. "I don't need pity." The attorney scribbled meaningless notes. There was no counter-argument sharpened enough to dull that metal's edge. "Are you here as witness?" he pushed. "Or as political symbol?" Adrienne tilted her head. "Symbols are created," she replied. "I didn't create anything. I survived. I showed up to tell the truth." The judge nodded once. "General Blake, you may proceed." She didn't consult paper. "I'm not here to list battles," she began. "I'm here because someone believed they could draw a gun at a funeral on the person who once led Americans through enemy fire. I've been hit by insurgents. I lost part of this arm to a landmine," she added, "but I never had a gun pointed at me until I wore this uniform on American soil." A hush thickened. No one could shrug that off as coincidence. No one could later claim they didn't know. A juror, a middle-aged white woman, breathed in sharply, realizing this wasn't about abstract right or wrong anymore. Briggs's lawyer tried again. "Some say public anger is driving this case, that you're being used as an emotional symbol." Adrienne nodded once. "If the public is angry, they're angry for me. I don't have time to be angry. I'm busy standing so they don't have to kneel." No one clapped, but a shift rolled through the room, the recognition that, whatever verdict came, the truth had already walked in on 2 feet and refused to sit down. Then came the ordered confrontation. Defendant and general, 4 steps apart. Briggs in orange, wrists cuffed, rebellion smoldering. Adrienne in dress blues, hands free, spine straight. The court called it to begin. Briggs spoke first. "Anyone who's seen real combat doesn't flinch at a Glock that hasn't fired," he said. "Guess that's not you." It was an argument. It was a last swing at her legitimacy. Adrienne didn't look at him. She unfolded a worn tactical map of Afghanistan, pointing to a red-circled location. "We were cut off here for 3 days. No air support. I brought 6 people out alive. One was the son of Senator Dalton," she added, the same senator who'd later argue against Briggs' prosecution. The irony hung in the air like smoke. No dramatics, just a connection nobody could unsee. "So you can shoot," Briggs scoffed, "but you can't handle someone aiming at you. That's funny." The cruelty wasn't clever, just naked. The room's silence thickened from discomfort into something like collective disgust. "I don't refuse being targeted," Adrienne answered calmly. "I refuse to bow." It wasn't a comeback. It was a definition of the line she'd drawn in that cemetery and was drawing again here. She moved to the evidence podium, holding up a copy of Briggs's 2012 complaint. "He didn't point that gun because he thought I was dangerous. He did it because he didn't believe I deserved to wear this uniform, one he never qualified for." For the first time, she turned fully toward him. No hatred in her eyes, just clarity. "That wasn't just a weapon," she said. "It was a hand that never had the right to hold it." You could feel the shift. Briggs stopped representing one man's misconduct. He became something uglier, proof that some people enter the system not to guard it, but to use it against those who outshine them. Adrienne bowed slightly toward the bench, like a field commander ending a report. Then she stepped down, no backward glance. She didn't need affirmation from anyone. The truth she'd carried in had already settled on every shoulder. The courtroom exhaled without realizing. It was clear now. This trial wasn't just about a finger near a trigger. It was about everyone who'd spent years refusing to look in the mirror. Briggs had joined the system not for honor, but for the thrill of being feared. He'd never been a model officer, only a man who learned how to survive in loopholes and shadows. Media had obsessed over his showdown with Blake. But once the cameras dimmed, reporters dug through old files and interviews. What they unearthed no longer looked like isolated rule-breaking. It looked like a long, deliberate descent. Patterns emerged, complaints ignored, warnings filed away, small abuses written off as personality. A man turned his sense of stolen entitlement into an unofficial weapon, waiting for the day he could aim it at someone who embodied everything he wasn't. And that chance, cruelly precise, arrived in a cemetery, gun drawn over folded flags, forcing a nation to decide whether it would keep looking away or finally confront the cost of calling itself just. The machine had cleared a path for him, wrapped in a cheap shine of usefulness. A resurfaced 2016 clip from Randall Park Elementary in North Carolina detonated across timelines overnight. In the shaky 2.5-minute video, Nolan Briggs, then a school liaison officer, kneels on an 11-year-old black boy, wrists zip-tied, face pressed to asphalt, sobbing while Briggs barks, "This one's wandering, refusing to id, not authorized to move." His tone is arid, stripped of reason. He taps the child's leg with his boot, glances at his radio, and reports flatly. One subject breaching restricted perimeter. Request residential confirmation. The write-up later concluded. Protocol followed. No excessive force. The case closed in 3 days. When the clip re-emerged, a former colleague, a woman who'd served under Briggs at the state police, appeared on national cable. The woman's voice was disguised, telling a quieter violence. "He slapped me in an elevator because I didn't snap to attention when he spoke," she said. She produced the internal misconduct complaint she'd filed. The department's archive showed only a dead note. Original file missing, unable to verify. That disappearance was the moment she quit. The last morning she ever buttoned a uniform. But the final rupture came from an overlooked local paper, the Riverbend Chronicle, where a hobby reporter dug through 10 years of personnel logs. Briggs's name surfaced 8 times. Racial remarks, intimidation, camera tampering. Every entry closed with one of 2 phrases, counseled or insufficient evidence. No one dared call it protection. No one honest called it random. That same night, a white man with silver hair and a slow southern drawl appeared on prime time. The man stated, "My name is Harold Milson. I used to supervise Nolan Briggs," he said, looking directly into the lens. "I kept him after 3 complaints," he admitted. "I told myself rough edges were tolerable if a man kept order. Now I know, by not cutting him loose, I authorized a moral execution." Not everyone was persuaded. Politicians muttered about incomplete procedures. A few right-wing commentators leaned on self-defense. But truth doesn't wait for polling. Once it steps into the light, it refuses to retreat. A consolidated brief from the Federal Council on Executive Accountability confirmed it plainly. Nolan Briggs wasn't a rogue anomaly. He was the inevitable output of a permissive chain where files vanished and complaints suffocated. Records lost, witnesses discouraged, authority handed to hands that never learned how to hold it. No department stepped forward to claim responsibility. No agency issued an apology with his name attached. But one conclusion glared. Briggs had never been a glitch. He was the calculated outcome of choices branded as order. Now he no longer smirked in court, no longer stared at General Adrian Blake with smug challenge. His features hardened, not from terror of the sentence, but from exposure. Every insult, every shove, every weaponized sneer came back to him in the only form he couldn't shrug off: undeniable evidence. He was undone not by a single ruling or a screaming crowd, but by overlooked fragments, old forms, forgotten footage, stories everyone had seen but chosen not to say aloud until silence finally cracked. As the shadow of one man, stripped down to raw motive, staggered before the bench, other shadows gathered opposite him. These shadows were not lawyers, not pundits, but soldiers. No one formally summoned them. No PR team arranged seating. Yet on the 9th day, as jurors filed into deliberation, more than 100 black veterans submitted a 4-page declaration. It began without legalese. We stayed quiet, not because we were ignorant, but because we believed someone else would speak. If Adrian Blake is not protected, none of us has any worth left. It didn't ask forgiveness or hurl accusations. It simply narrated the lives of those who'd breathed the same dust as she had, seen her command under fire, and watched her guard dignity where death treated everyone equally. Staff Sergeant Marcus Porter, retired, who'd served with Blake in Helmand in 2010, wrote, "She jumped first when the mine went off and was last to leave after hauling every wounded body out. The only time I ever bowed my head to a superior," he continued, "was not for rank, but because she carried the dignity of our whole unit when I had nothing left to grip." No one read that dry-eyed. She wasn't being turned into a saint. Those who'd stood at death's edge were confirming she was among the rare few who didn't use power as a pedestal, but as cover for others. Down in South Florida, a combat veteran battling PTSD sat before a local camera, ticks jolting his face, gaze razor sharp. "My daughter keeps asking who a real role model is," he said. "I never mentioned a princess. I said Blake, not because she's flawless, but because when I broke down in rubble, she dragged me out without caring what my name was." No swelling soundtrack, no dramatic zoom. These accounts didn't need Polish. In a courtroom wrestling with the divide between earned honor and bloated authority, those voices became bedrock. The final anchoring testimony came from a former Navy SEAL who'd never gone near a TV camera. In a short handwritten letter, he described being shot in the leg while Blake wrapped a tourniquet. "When I came to, I told her, 'I don't want a woman saving me,'" he confessed. "She said nothing, didn't flinch, just kept her hand on my leg until medics arrived. I'm not writing this to apologize," he concluded. "I'm writing to say the person I insulted is the only reason I'm alive." People once called her detached, iron-willed. These stories didn't label her. They constructed her. Raw bricks, some chipped, all heavy. No slogans needed. She wasn't shielded by might. She was surrounded by those she'd lifted off battlefields and pushed back toward life. Media outlets carried the declaration, but even partisan channels struggled to spin it. This time, the speakers weren't commentators or attorneys. They were men and women whose lives had once literally hung from each other's hands. The letter ended with a line that landed like a final period. "If justice does not stand with Blake, then justice has already fallen." The trial moved into its 13th day. Courtroom benches no longer felt like seating. They were rows in a ledger. Every flinch, every hesitant answer, every trembling raised hand pressed against the spine of the very system people were trying to keep upright. This was no place for balance anymore. Truth doesn't negotiate. It only needs out. First on the stand that morning was Lieutenant Patrick Hale, a white officer who'd worked 6 years alongside Briggs in admin. His evaluations were ordinary, his career unremarkable. But when asked, "Were you ever instructed to ignore Briggs's misconduct?" He locked up. 3 seconds. 5. A dry swallow. Then his voice shattered the room. "We were ordered not to see it," he said. The silence that followed wasn't absence of sound. It was an impact crater. That answer was more than testimony. It was an institutional confession. The judge requested documents. An internal memo from November 18, 2021, labeled Unstable Behavior Report, Officer Briggs, Confidential, was read aloud. Its centerline cut like a scar. "Briggs is dangerous but useful. Maintain control. No spin necessary." The system's own language had indicted itself. Prosecutors then requested more records, internal message threads between commanders. After argument, 3 chains were released. The shortest was one text from a duty captain 3 days before the funeral. "Let him rough the brass up if he wants. Keeps them in line." The words dropped like a hammer. The gallery didn't yell. They didn't have to. Every comma, every period felt like a gavel in a future history book. People realized they hadn't just tolerated a man, they'd curated him. Then something unprecedented happened. From the audience, State Police Commissioner Daniel O'Keefe stepped forward. He hadn't been called. He wasn't on any witness list. He walked like someone dragging a weight. "I'd like to address the court," he said, "not as a commissioner, but as someone who let a broken system keep breathing." The room held its breath. O'Keefe didn't look at Blake or Briggs. "I read the reports," he confessed. "I saw the complaints. I signed off on letting them stay buried. I'm not asking forgiveness. I just want it clear. It wasn't one officer who drew that gun. The whole system chambered it." Before the echo faded, the left side door opened. No bailiff called a name, but everyone knew his turn had come. Briggs rose, head high, no apology in sight. His prison suit hung immaculate. His pace wasn't hurried or hesitant. Each step felt like a dare, not to the judge, but to the idea of order this trial was trying desperately to salvage. No one moved to stop him. He took his place, unrestrained. A lawyer half rose to remind him of limits, then sank back, realizing any procedural scolding now would sound absurd. Briggs inhaled sharply. "You want truth?" he said evenly. "Fine, listen up. I'm not the monster you scripted for your drama specials. I'm not your neat little villain so the system can blame me and wash its conscience. I'm your finest product," he continued, "built from rewarded silence and ethics programmed to dodge reality." The room tightened. A juror's fingernail tapped wood, loud as a drumstick against glass. He fixed his stare on the jury. "Don't sit there pretending you're pure," he spat gently. "I did what you think about, but won't say. I signed off on holding black kids without proof to balance statistics," he said. "I funded juvenile lockups because it helped elections. This machine runs on quiet agreement. I just had the guts to call it what it is." A reporter dropped her pen, fingers shaking, remembering past interviews where she'd quoted him without ever pushing back. Juror 9 frowned, not in disbelief, but in that sick space where recognition and disgust overlap. "Don't tell me I'm lying," Briggs snapped, seeing heads slowly shake. "You've been silent for decades. When a teenager stripped and questioned with cameras off and you scroll past, where were you? When a mother's deported over paperwork? His volume rose, not like a man losing control, but like someone landing a prepared blow. No one could look him straight in the face anymore. He turned back toward the jury box, reading every crack. He spotted a man in the back row, shoulders shuddering, hand clamped over his mouth. A choked sob escaped. Briggs smiled, viciously satisfied. "Looks like I hit the abscess," he murmured. "If I'm going down, this America's coming with me," he said. "Not because I'm heroic, because I'm a mirror twisted by your glances away and your convenient clicks, and every time you chose silence to save your image." The crying juror wasn't grieving for Briggs. He was hearing echoes of his own compromises, signing off on a biased policy, ignoring a misconduct report with not enough info as an excuse, now that cowardice was being yanked into daylight. The judge moved to cut him off. Briggs raised his hand, not asking permission, but blessing his own confession. He didn't need more words. He'd already slipped collapse into the seams of the room. "Give me 10 years, 20 life," he hissed. "When you sentence me, you sentence the myth that we've outgrown our past. You haven't. You just learned better ways to hide it." In the broadcast booth, a director cursed. No one dared cut the feed. Online, the hashtag #NarsAmGuilty spiked, not in solidarity with Briggs, but as a grim acknowledgement that he'd pierced a delicate illusion. "At least I'm not part of it." "Yes, I'm guilty," he exhaled, "but I'm not alone. That's why I'll sleep better than you tonight." No applause followed. But everyone knew he hadn't asked for mercy. He'd laid a curse on the room. The last stillness belonged not to a victor, but to the man who'd failed so completely, he managed to drag the tower down with him, using nothing but the truth twisted through his own venom. As air thickened around his words, people realized the mask had fallen. No one stood untouched. No one would leave wearing white. The clerk's footsteps broke the spell, heels clicking like ritual drums. No cue was needed. The moment had arrived. The jury foreman stood, verdict sheet in hand. The paper stayed steady. His eyes did not. A lifetime in law had not prepared him for this pronouncement. He looked at no one, not the defendant, not Blake, not his peers. He stared into a blank patch of wall as if reading the obituary of an era he'd once trusted. We, the jury, having reviewed all evidence and testimony in open court, sentenced the defendant, Nolan Briggs, to life imprisonment without parole, he read. No cheers, no sobs, no clapping. Only one sound cracked the air, louder, ragged, broken, slicing the room. Briggs laughed, not like a madman, not like a relieved man, but like someone watching a long, ugly joke finally admit itself. He rose without help, eyes sharp as an old knife, rusted but still cutting. "In the end, guns don't kill," he spat. "Fear kills everyone." The words landed with horrifying accuracy. No one answered. How do you respond to something both vile and true? Those who'd believed justice was solid now watched it quiver in the grip of the man just condemned. The trembling, not the sentence, became the real verdict. No one stood. No one moved. Heads bowed, not in reverence, but like mourners at a funeral. Except the deceased wasn't a person, it was an illusion. General Blake sat still, eyes forward, not granting Briggs a final glance. Her gaze traveled beyond the walls, towards something unfinished, a memory that hadn't yet found its ending. In the last row, a 10-year-old boy sat quietly. The same child who'd asked at the cemetery, "What is that man doing?" His innocent question remained the sharpest verdict. It didn't demand punishment. It asked that what justice even means. Blake turned slightly, just enough for him to see her face. She didn't answer. Some questions deserve answers lived, not spoken. Their eyes met, forming a quiet pact. Truth isn't what people announce. It's what they can no longer outrun. Guards led Briggs out. No one waved. No one looked away. The room turned into a crypt. The gavel hadn't just struck wood. It had struck the last bit of naive belief that law alone could guarantee righteousness. People remained seated, not because they were tired, but because there was nothing noble left to stand for. This hadn't been a trial. It was a burial of an age that trusted justice to find its own way home. Outside, the reckoning shifted to another place, a stone wall on the eastern edge of the federal military cemetery. At first, just one folded note was taped there. No name, no address. 4 words in a shaky hand: "I turned my back." No one knew who wrote it, which meant no one could stop what followed. Within 3 days, the wall was speckled with paper. No announcement, no hashtag campaign. People simply came, carrying pens and shame. Each note was handwritten, each apology unmistakably personal. Some managed a single sentence, others crossed out lines again and again. Some cried before pressing their scrap against cold stone. None of them posed for photos on the way out. A 10-year-old in a faded red shirt wrote in pencil, "I don't get why grown-ups have to relearn how to treat heroes." His note sat beside another. "I teach history and skipped Blake because I feared the why." The 2 pages didn't talk to each other, but together they read like a hymn with no music, a quiet requiem for all the times silence was misread as neutrality. A veteran from Louisiana with silver hair and stooped shoulders stood near the central stone for hours. He didn't cry or kneel. Finally, he taped a line at the entrance checkpoint. "Sorry I applauded when he was promoted." A sentence thin as a blade, cutting through layers of brass once pinned to men like Briggs. Former subordinates drifted in alone, off schedule, leaving their own slips. One officer, face hidden under cap, mask, and glasses, came just after midnight. He pressed his note on the wall and left without looking back. It read, "We weren't blind. We were scared to see ourselves." That confession froze the air. No one rebutted. Truth from the shadows carries more weight than 1,000 polished speeches from podiums. By day 5, ordinary paper felt inadequate. Architecture students arrived with a hollow steel frame, 10 feet tall, open to the wind. No permits, no sponsors. They bolted it beside the wall, a skeleton waiting to be filled. People began covering it with apology notes. 126 in all. The notes were stuck to salvaged steel panels once used as detention center gates. Metal that had locked the innocent now held confessions. Whispers started calling it the Wall of Regret. Not an official monument, no plaque, no ribbon cutting. Just a structure that said, "This isn't for forgiveness. It's for remembering complicity." Blake never spoke there. She posed for no pictures. Witnesses occasionally saw her among the trees, holding a single blank slip of paper. She never taped it up. She carried it like a reminder that her job wasn't to write a message. It was to live one. As the notes yellowed and the steel stayed icy, her name quietly entered classrooms instead. Not as a chant and not on a hero's banner, but as a fracture line. At the National Officer Strategy Academy, the leadership syllabus changed. Week 8 bore a new lecture title, not because she was a general, but because she didn't draw her weapon. No exclamation mark, no photo. Just the words on a slide that silenced the hall the moment they appeared. The retired colonel teaching that day didn't start with dates or decorations. He played a 12-second clip. Blake standing at the funeral, hands still, eyes locked, no commands, no rebuttals. When the clip ended, he asked, "Why did she choose to do nothing?" No one answered. Everyone understood. Her refusal to react forced the entire system to react instead. A cadet stood up and asked, "Are we studying ethics to manage weapons or to manage ourselves?" There was no tidy reply. Training quietly shifted from what to do to what our choices cost. At the State University of Constitutional Law, students reenacted the Briggs trial. Each had to pick a role: juror, defense, witness, bystander. There were no model answers, only confrontations. One group staged it in a glass-walled courtyard so anyone walking past could watch. They argued, cried, walked out. When it ended, no one applauded. They stood as if hearing a verdict aimed at them. The Federal Policy Institute listed Blake not under heroes, but under boundary cases, when one person holds the line for many. Critics complained it diminished her. The backlash triggered a 3-day forum. Between silence and resistance, who carries the gap? Journalists begged for interviews, for a closing statement. Blake sent back one handwritten line: "If I'd tried to explain myself, I might never have stood up from that cemetery." No flourish, just refusal. She understood she didn't need to be cast as a great woman. She had to remain the question that forces others to ask, why did a general have to face a system's full cowardice alone? Meanwhile, Briggs's name was being scrubbed in quiet, relentless strokes. During a policy seminar at Northridge University, students hijacked a slide that praised him, overlaying his face with, "Not everything taught deserves to stay." When the professor skipped comment and continued, the class rose in silence and walked out. The clip, captioned, "Not in our syllabus," flew across feeds. No shouting, just the sound of reclining seats snapping upright. In a Chicago enforcement library, a staffer refused to restore Briggs's mold-damaged monograph after a leak. Asked why, she said, "Some things should rot, just like what created them." Her words became a tagline for an online push to remove Briggs's writings from required reading. Dozens of universities quietly complied, revising syllabi without fanfare. Blake's name never appeared on stamps or street signs. Instead, it surfaced on class outlines, thesis covers, diagrams, and ethics modules labeled "Case, Standing Still Under Threat." One communication major wrote a thesis titled, "Adrienne Blake, The Anatomy of an Unyielding No." There were no photos, almost no quotes, just an analysis of how her silence forced reaction. At a Justice Department conference, organizers accidentally reused an old clip of Briggs speaking about necessary pressure. Within 10 seconds, attendees broke into sharp, deliberate applause to drown him out, not endorse him. Someone stood and asked, "If this man once represented us, maybe our representation needs rebuilding." No one disagreed. The program shifted, and his name vanished from future agendas. When institutions begin teaching someone, it's rarely because they're flawless. It's because they activated something people had let numb. Blake wasn't installed as a saint. She became a beat that forced the rhythm to change. Her name turned into a verb whispered in training halls, "Blake it," meaning stand your ground without playing their script. No press release defined it. People simply understood. On a Monday at federal police headquarters, a bronze plaque listing officers of steadfast honor developed a quiet gap. Between two shining squares, one name had disappeared: Briggs. No announcement explained it. A technician polished the blank space and stepped aside. In its place, new words were engraved: force is not authority. History didn't erase him. It refused to carry him forward. That evening, a photo of the altered board hit Reddit, posted by a maintenance worker with the caption, "A clean void beats dirty honor." Old clips of Briggs's speeches were spliced beside trial footage. Accounts that once praised him scrambled to delete videos, mute comments, apologize. The public was unforgiving, not because mistakes had been made, but because those mistakes had once been worn like armor. In a Capitol Hill cafe, a server quietly removed a spoon from an older patron's saucer. When he asked why, she replied, "We don't hand utensils to people who ordered beatings to hit quotas." Imaung, he'd been Briggs's media aide. Nearby tables emptied, not theatrically, but as if no one wanted to share oxygen with the residue of his career. At an advanced security academy, students were assigned to rebut stability through fear, a model Briggs had championed. One first year turned in 4 lines. "I don't need lessons on scaring people. I need to learn how to stand beside them, not over them. If your system taught the opposite, your system needs school." The essay spread through academic forums as the manifesto of those who refused to kneel. In Briggs prison, inmates requested transfers away from his tier, not from fear, but because they didn't want to share space with weaponized cowardice. One ex-officer incarcerated for refusing to enforce Briggs's quotas said in a sealed interview, "I eat in silence now, but at least I'm not breathing the same air as someone who thought power meant never listening." In a national policy archive, his official portrait hung upside down, glass shattered, face turned to the wall. Asked about it, a senior clerk said, "Leave it." The ruin itself had become the commentary. People stopped saying, "His name was taken down," and started saying, "That space reminds us we once got it wrong." The emptiness became the most honest plaque they had. A memo circulated quietly through state commendation offices. Revoke all medals, retrieve certificates, scrub Briggs from honor databases. The reason was terse, no longer consistent with public trust. Clerks processed the removals as if taking out trash. No righteous speeches, just deletion. At a regional academy where his bust once stood, cadets arrived one Saturday to find the statue gone. In its place, a bear block with a tin sign scratched by hand. "No longer represents us." A cadet filmed it, posting, "This morning, the courtyard finally felt honest." Millions watched. Websites quietly stripped his quotes from sidebars, his photos from leadership pages. No comment sections flared because the silence said enough. The era of using him as a template was over. Even the prison where Briggs lived couldn't ignore the shift. Their public inbox filled with thousands of veteran emails. No threats, just 2 words echoed again and again. "No forgiveness." "I marched under a flag he waved," one wrote. "Now I burn that banner myself because it isn't clean." Another, "We don't hate. We just refuse to be represented by someone who crushed honor." Academy alumni petitioned to remove his signature from their diplomas. The school board replied with 3 words, "We understand. Approved." The prison never answered. It didn't have to. Silence had become agreement. When Briggs appealed to the Supreme Military Court, the response was swift and final. Appeal denied. Beneath the Chief Justice's name, one line cut through years of political maneuvering. This sentence is not only for a man, but for a doctrine that governs by fear. From then on, punishment felt less like retribution, more like surgery, cutting out a diseased principle. A short, unsigned article spread online. We're not appealing the verdict, we're appealing the trust that made him believable. Students printed it on posters, shirts, classroom doors. A tech company that once hired Briggs as a governance advisor scrubbed every trace of him from its campaigns. Not under pressure, but because no one dared pitch him as a model of human-centered control anymore. His pension and honorary stipends vanished in a 2-hour vote. The stated reason: breach of public trust. A line of code removed his name from payment systems, a silent keystroke ending years of unearned reward. When the notice reached his cell, the guard slid it onto his tray without comment. Briggs looked up for a reaction and got none. Even the man holding the keys called him only Inmate 739 now. On a policy podcast, a former cabinet advisor said, "If we once wrote his name in gold, today silence carves it out with minus signs." The quote circulated over a blurred screenshot of Briggs behind glass. At a rehab wing, Briggs had helped fund nurses' petition to rename it after Blake. The board caved after thousands of signatures. A new plaque appeared: "The Blake Wing, for those who carried honor and wounds." Someone stitched old footage of Briggs cutting the original ribbon with shots of the updated sign. 19 seconds. No dialogue, just a before and after that the internet embraced with a quiet, satisfied nod. From then on, removing him wasn't erasure, it was filtration, a methodical cleansing of a narrative that had once called cruelty a leadership style. People began to understand cancellation wasn't the execution of a person. It was the awakening of a generation done negotiating with brutality in uniform. Nobody had to declare the end of the Briggs era. At a memorial hall in Denver where his portrait once hung, visitors saw only a patch of repainted wall, the shade slightly off. A teenager stared at it, then wrote in the guest book, "Sometimes silence is justice catching its breath." A paper briefly taped there read, "Once displayed here, a face unworthy of being seen again." It was torn down minutes later, but not before photos flooded timelines. Replicas appeared on walls nationwide. Journalism students shot a documentary about his disappearing image. They interviewed a retired guard who cried describing how Briggs once ordered a teenage boy isolated 48 hours for looking defiant. "I thought I was guarding order," the guard said. "I was protecting wrongdoing." That admission, set to a bare piano track, became one of the most shared clips of the year. At a law enforcement photo exhibit in Texas, visitors demanded Briggs's image be removed from a digital archive. When organizers hesitated, someone hacked the captions to read, "Removed does not represent." The exhibit went dark the next day. Their press release never mentioned him. That attempt at neutrality sparked a louder question. Why did the system cling to his image for so long? Inside prison, inmates shifted their tables away from his usual spot. One evening, someone scratched into the concrete, "A leader isn't who scares people, it's who others choose to follow." Guards saw the carving and left it. Later, a leaked video caught Briggs deliberately turning his face away as he passed it. That single frame told the internet everything it needed to know. Blake didn't comment, endorse, or condemn any of it. She understood this wasn't a duel between personalities. It was a system finally dragged into a mirror it had long avoided. Briggs's fading footprint didn't give her joy. It simply confirmed a hard truth. Collapse doesn't always come with explosions. Sometimes it arrives when a name stops being spoken. From now on, classes on ethics and power won't start with the wrongdoer's name. They'll start with a blank asking, what are we willing to forget and what must we refuse to bury? That blank has left the textbooks and entered reflex. At USC, when a professor absent-mindedly held up Briggs as a case study in crowd management, the entire hall rose in unison. No yelling, just standing. He couldn't finish the lecture. Video of the stand-up lesson gathered millions of views. No narration, just footage of students refusing to sit for a name history no longer accepted. At a police appreciation ceremony, a reader paused on Briggs's name and finally said, "This name has been withdrawn," before skipping ahead. A live stream of that hesitation became its own quiet landmark. In Briggs's cell, a book from the library bore a handwritten note on the inside cover. "Your theory couldn't save you. No one wants to read it." Staff didn't investigate. The book broke no rules. When he tried returning it, no one took it. After that, the library stopped lending anything he'd authored. The volume stayed on shelves as artifacts of an error, not sources of wisdom. In a downtown subway station, a Heroes of Security billboard got replaced with graffiti, a blank square outlined in spray paint, and the words, "Not everyone once displayed deserves another turn." City crews painted over it twice. Each time, someone restored it by morning. Eventually, officials stopped trying, unwittingly agreeing that some lessons should remain ugly to be remembered. A circle of former officers promoted under Briggs's doctrine held a press briefing to renounce his influence. No longer a model, no longer a man, no longer of value, they read together. The video circulated quietly within law enforcement channels, a detox with no official directive, yet understood as essential. Briggs didn't need news alerts to know what was happening. He could feel the absence. When a name vanishes from wall plaques, training slides, casual conversation, that isn't discipline, it's exile. Not from the justice system, but from collective memory. As his name dissolved, people realized the empty space needed filling with something that wasn't about rank or medals, something that couldn't be revoked. The image that remained was a woman who'd stayed upright when everything else shook. Since his conviction, Briggs's world had shrunk to concrete and steel. Outside, a veteran mailed back an old photo of them together with a note, "I don't pose with trash." The picture became a meme. In the prison yard, inmates began turning their backs whenever he entered. Someone poured an entire shaker of salt into his food once. No one confessed. He shouted. The room kept eating as if he were yelling at headstones. Online law students launched Erase the Serpent's Trail, flooding faculty inboxes with demands to pull Briggs's quotes from curricula. Videos of his portraits being taken down ended not in cheers, but in a heavy, cleansing quiet. We know everyone who stayed with this story carries their own scars. A slight dismissed, a moment you refused to bow. Tell us, when did you stand still, and what kept you upright? If this resonated, like, share, subscribe, not for our fame, but so more buried truths find air. If you feel that pull, you're one more reason we don't step back. For those of us with more years behind us than ahead, General Blake's stand at that graveside is a hard reminder. First, dignity is not a luxury. It's a line in the sand. If a 4-star black woman in uniform can be held at gunpoint over a coffin, none of us is truly safe. Second, silence is its own weapon. Every time we look away, we help load someone else's gun. Friends, after hearing about General Blake standing tall with a gun pointed at her over a soldier's coffin, how does it sit with you? Do you believe our country can still choose courage over fear, dignity over silence? I'd love to hear your own memories or moments when you refuse to bow. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe so we can keep learning from one another.